Hi folks, how are you doing? So the World Championship match in Sochi 2014 is over. After 11 interesting games, Magnus Carlsen from Norway retains his title of World Chess Champion against Viswanathan Anand from India. Today in the last game we saw a very interesting and tense battle. Surely Anand had to try something, and he did, and we had a very double-edged and exciting game. Eventually it was a decisive one. Let's see what happened. Carlsen was having white pieces, and yet again we saw the Ruy Lopez. Once again the Indian former world champion relies on the Berlin, and once again Carlsen goes for the main line, the famous move order leading to the queenless Berlin endgame. Once again Carlsen plays h3, but this time no more king e8. On this move by Vichy, he plays bishop to d7, deviating from previous games of this match. Pretty much his plan, black's plan here is more or less to go with the king to the queen side in some move order, playing b6, king c8, king b6, and try to put the bishop probably on c6, something like that, and try to get something going. We saw some normal moves, knight c3, h6. I'm assuming this is very theoretical. I have no idea about theory of this opening at this point, and king c8 after b3, bishop to b2, and c5. This is an interesting move. Well, people who knew about this opening were kind of mildly surprised, because maybe this is not the most popular move order, I don't know. Certainly this is getting this interesting d4 square for black under this pawn's control, and the bishop now could go to c6 if it pleases so, but also it's letting white the option of putting the knight on d5, which previously wasn't an option because the pawn was there. Rook a d1 anyway was played by Carlsen. The black king cannot leave just like that, the bishop would be hanging. b6 is played, pretty normal I guess. Rook f e1, and the bishop goes to e6, getting into a safe square, and sometimes threatening to get c4 going with interesting ideas, opening up like the position for the bishop pair. Now this bishop on e6 and the one on f8 would be interesting pieces. This could be some kind of plan for black, and that's why probably Magnus takes his opportunity to put the knight in the center, protected by the rook on d1. Knight to d5 was played. g5, I'm guessing it's a prophylactic move from to stop black from playing knight, to stop white from playing knight to f4, chasing this good-looking bishop which is holding black's position in the center. g5 takes f4 under control, and also, who knows, bishop going to g7 could be a way to develop the dark squared bishops. c4, reinforcing the central position of the knight, and finally king to b7. The king goes where it was heading for from the beginning. King to h2, really somehow strange looking move, although if it's Carlsen playing there are no strange moves, I guess. After that queen f1 we saw in this match, or that queen h1 or queen h2 last year in Chennai, so Carlsen certainly has his ideas. Well, I must say it was really people were really agreeing at this point that black, Anand in this case, had nothing to I mean, had to be really glad about the opening phase. His position is really solid, looking very good, not really much problems, and certainly it was a playable position, so he couldn't complain much about the opening at this point. King h2 is probably the proof that you don't have any problems with black here. White has to try some strange plans to try to get something going. a5 was played, very natural and nice looking for Anand. If he can open the a file, playing a4, etc., well, he will get lots of play with his rook on a8, which could get really active, but Carlsen stops it right away. a4, and knight to e7 was played. g4, you could see this was more or less the idea of the king going to h2, playing g4, and the king later will go to g3. Who knows, support later h4 or f4. Remember, white has always a 4 against 3 in this king side in the Berlin, so white should try to push his pawns, makes sense. But now the knight goes back as f4, maybe even h4, but f4 mainly is a possible square for this knight, so it goes back to g6, king to g3, and we see bishop to e7, finally communicating the rooks. Having a really good position with black, not much problems here. Bishop pair so far, and really an interesting position, very tense. Computer kept saying this is equal, but both players are really fighting here to find ideas to really improve pieces, and really a tense position for the 11th game of this match. Knight d2 was played. Now this knight would like to go to e4 and later to f6, reinforcing the colleague on d5. Rook h d8 and knight e4. Here bishop f8 was played, very precise move by Anand, keeping the bishop pair. If black plays like some other move, like rook ac8 for instance, I guess white could try knight takes e7, knight takes, and put the knight on f6, with ideas like bishop c1 and later push f4. Black has got deprived of his bishop pair, which is one of his main sources of counterplay or compensation in the Berlin, and certainly white looks here better because he has a clear plan of playing f4, while black, well, it is not clear why he lost his bishop pair. So bishop f8 was the best move here, and certainly Anand played it. Knight e to f6, and we're reaching critical points of this game. 23 moves have been played, and here Anand gets going with a very interesting move, b5. Really not that expected, I mean, at least for amateurs like me. I mean, the commentators were speculating with this possibility, and it really is very strong move. This b5 seems really, at the first sight one can say, well, it's just a pawn, but not so much. Black has the bishop pair and wants to open the position for his bishops, and tries really to get active play, active pieces. You could really see Carlsen wasn't that glad with his position after b5, as he was taking his time to find a reply here, and certainly it's not that easy to keep the equality here with white. I mean, taking the pawn with either pawn here wasn't the greatest of plans, because if a takes, a4 was the move. This is a pure pawn sacrifice to get active pieces. B takes, rook takes, and black already has an open a file to move his rooks into white's position. c4 is under fire right now. The other rook will come in through a8 really quickly. The knight could go to f4 in good conditions, who knows, after some exchanges on d5. So the position really looks better for black here, with some initiative, some really counter chances, counterplay for the pawn. If the other pawn was to take on b5, the key idea was c6, once again sacrificing the pawn. Pawn takes and king takes. Now 3 pieces are attacking this knight on d5. White is defending it twice, and it cannot be reinforced anymore, so the knight must leave. Say here bishop takes on b3 and everything falls apart. Black is winning here. I mean, the rook on d1 is under attack, a4 is going to fall. This is horrible for white. So taking the pawn on b5, as strange as it could seem, is not looking very well at all for Carlsen. So he finally decided to play bishop to c3, kind of ignore this threat and force black to make a decision. Well, Anand took on a4, b takes, and played king c6. Now he has the b file for his rooks to come in. I think the point is that white really cannot fight for the b file, because if he plays something like rook to b1, black could go bishop g7, undermining the protectors of this interesting d5 square. And if, say, rook e d1, now bishop takes, and he could take on d5, winning a pawn. Of course, this may not be that forced, but this could explain somehow the idea of why white cannot fight for the b file that easily. Carlsen plays king f3, really a very accurate and precise defensive move. I mean, this is one of his real strengths. One of the things has brought him here to being world champion. The ability to defend really tough positions, not to crack under pressure, and fight the real cold-blooded defensive moves. King to f3 to go to e4 and support the knight on d5. Simple centralization. Rook to b8 was played here. Here we had a really decisive moment. Engines were saying that the move bishop e7 was much more precise. It was giving Anand some slight edge, some interesting edge. The point could be like if something like king e4, bishop takes, e takes, and black could exchange on d5, pawn takes. After king d6, white has potentially a couple of weak pawns. Black still has the same ideas Anand could try later, like putting a rook on b8, or well, if the king goes, if the king is still in the center, just checking there, then later go with the rook to the b file, and who knows, this is very sharp, extremely interesting. But Anand didn't go for this. He played rook d to b8, and after king e4 he plays an all-in kind of move, sacrificing the exchange here. This was an interesting move, and all kinds of opinions. There were all kinds of opinions on this move. Some said it was a nonsense, a suicidal move. Others said it was a very brave and courageous opinion. I mean, courageous move, and you had to go for this. Well, something in between, I guess. Anand had to try something very double-edged and sharp. Maybe it wasn't objectively the best, but you know, he had to try it. Maybe he rushed. Who knows? The question is that he gets the bishop pair and the protected passed pawn on b4 for the exchange. Whether it was maybe too early or not, well, we will see in the game. Probably it wasn't the best time to do this, as now Carlsen will be merciless. He's like a shark in the ocean. When it smells the blood, he will play like a machine from now on. Knight h5 was played, extremely precise move, going for f4. Carlsen sees the potential of his pawn's superiority on the king side, 4 against 3. King goes back to b7 with the ideas of moving these c pawns, and f4. Certainly this pawn has to be taken, or either piece of here or e6 or g6 must move, because a simple fork is threatened. Anand took, and lots of exchange happened on f4. Well, Anand takes a pawn on c4 as a result of this, but unfortunately for him, Carlsen has this very active rook d7 move, touching this f7 pawn, touching c7, and the difference is that rook a8 isn't that active. Rook a6 was played, knight d5 looking pretty natural, attacking c7. Anand isn't really willing to give up his bishop pair exchanging here. That would help white a lot, so he's kind of forced to play rook c6 defending. But it was pretty much clear that the game was basically over at this point. Everybody was agreeing that Carlsen would win this without much effort, without that much of a problem. Technically one endgame, at least at this Super GM level. No need to say, needless to say, Magnus Carlsen was really comfortable at this point. Well, Anand had to try it, and he went all in, even if it didn't pay off. Kudos to him. I think he had to try something brave and risky. Rook just takes on f7, bishop to c5 as it was under attack on f8. And now the simple and simplifying method of winning this, as Carlsen did, was taking on c7, rook takes, knight takes. Very interesting tactical detail is stopping black from taking the knight on c7. King c6 was played here to stop the knight from coming back to d5 at least. The interesting point was that if Anand takes this, rook c1 could be played, attacking both bishops. b3, rook takes, and b2 isn't working for black, unfortunately, because white takes this with a tempo, with a check, then goes to the b5, controlling b square, the b1 square, the b file, and the game is obviously over. So the knight cannot be taken here. King c6 was played, and the knight goes back to b5. Anand decided to take on b5, a takes, pawn takes, he takes another pawn. He has connected passed pawns on a and b file, but unfortunately for him and for Indian fans, this will not be enough. Carlsen will be merciless here. e6, b3, and king d3. Remember that square rule we're taught, we learn when we're learning opponent games. Well, the king of Carlsen is already inside this square of the passed pawn. Bishop to e7, as white's pawn was threatening to go to e7. h4, once again, of course, black cannot take, as e7, and black would have to give up his piece. So after h4, a4 was played, trying to get your passed pawns, but g5, creating yet another passer. And after a3, king to c3, very precisely controlling these pawns, and it was over. Viswanathan resigned the game. 45 moves had been played, and there it went. It is over. It's all she wrote. Magnus Carlsen is world chess champion 2014 in Sochi, retains his title. Not that easy as in Chennai last year, but still a convincing victory by the Norwegian GM. Thanks for watching.